A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it. Agent K, Men in Black. The Daily Grind, Chapter 133. Ugh! James let out the noise as he lay half-sprawled across the desk. It looked like a chaotic gesture, but in reality he'd flopped quite gently to avoid spilling the host of manila folders that currently cluttered the space. He'd also taken the time to make sure his ponytail had hit the desk next to his head, so the cascade of black hair looked suitably dramatic. James waited for a minute or two, and then tilted his eyes up toward the door. Nothing. Ugh! He repeated, louder and with more dramatic inflection than the first try. He was sitting in his office on the 30-somethingth floor of a building in another city from where most of the elevator that took him here was. Securing the space had been JP's doing, and as near as James was a bit aware, he had literally won it in a bet, which was worrying for all kinds of reasons. Bridging the geographical gap had been the work of several people with individual powers and a lot of willpower coming together to create a very specific doorway from their main building to this actual, literal office space. James had a corner office, with shelves and decent lighting and stuff. It was weird. Or maybe weird was a word he should stop throwing around since he had dungeon adventures on half the days of the week now. Absurd? Unexpected, at least. There was a list of people who belonged in offices, and James wasn't on it. Not normal offices, anyway. From the hall outside his door, which was currently sitting open and letting the distressed noises he was making circulate, came the sound of footsteps. James slumped back to the desktop. "What the butts are you doing?" the eternally bubbly voice of Sarah asked him. James looked up. His friend was wearing a bright yellow sundress, ignoring the fact that it was December, and leaning against his doorframe. "I'm being dramatic," James told her. "Did your team lose at blaseball again?" she asked with a pitying gaze. "First of all, my team won a championship and has ascended to the big leagues. Second of all, blaseball has been on break for a while now," James told her. "And while I would really, really like to tell you all about that—" "No, my hubris!" Sarah exclaimed. "I don't have time," James finished, "because we're doing interviews today, and I'm too buried in resumes to look over before then to talk about how a giant squid ate a god in my simulated internet baseball game." "Whew, hubris averted," Sarah said. "So anyone look good?" "I don't really know how to read resumes," James admitted. Sarah stepped into his office and dropped into one of the chairs on the other side of his desk, pulling the other one over to form a footstool. "You literally have a business degree," she accused him. "How do you not know that? Not that I know anything about it, but it seems pretty straightforward, and now that I say that, I realize there's probably hidden depths." "It's more like—" James considered how to phrase what he was thinking. "It's more like people do have hidden depths, and they don't write them on a resume. Also, our resumes this time aren't the same as we'd get as if we were hiring for a normal job, because we actually attempted to do real recruiting, so half of these people are friends or contacts that order members let in on some of the mystery ahead of time." "And that confuses you," Sarah deduced slyly, rubbing at her chin. "No, that... Okay, yes, it confuses things in general. I guess I'm assuming that people are lying on their resumes as a matter of course." James shrugged as he flipped open one of his folders. "Like, look at this guy. This guy has multiple glowing personal and academic references, plays lacrosse, has a job as a baker, puts in volunteer hours at a public park, and... James slumped forward with his head in his hands. "And?" Sarah looked at her best friend and saw the nervous twitch in his eye, the way he seemed to shrink down a bit as he was reading the paperwork in front of him. "And, you think these people are too good for us. Or for you," she said. "I know they are," James said flatly. "Even the kids, kind of, though I'm reading between the lines on them and adding 'survived' to their resumes." "High schoolers still pestering you?" she asked with a smile. James snorted in reply, but there was no malice to it. "Yeah, we're going to try a few of them as, I guess, interns. Not on any delves, though." "Well, duh." Oh, you say duh, but you tell me what high school us would have instantly tried to sneak into. Delves, Sarah said without hesitation. Right, James agreed. So we need to prepare for that. We could just not take on interns, Sarah suggested. This sounds mean, but we don't owe them anything. But you did save their lives. That doesn't make them part of... She sat up, propped her elbows on the desk, and made direct eye contact with James. Are we collecting people you saved? She demanded. We are. You are. I didn't even think about this. 90% of the Order is people whose lives you've rescued. James looked at her with laughter in his eyes. Did you only just notice this? Yeah, I'm taking my recruitment strategy from anime, he admitted. But also, we seriously are hiring new people too, which has a decent track record. 2 of the 3 people you've ever hired... Sarah didn't finish the sentence. Everyone forgets that I hired other people and they just regular quit, James grumbled. Anyway, do you want to do interviews with me? It'd be nice to have a second perspective. Sarah eyed him warily. You seem kind of exhausted today. Are you okay? I remember you being excited about this last time. What happened? People keep dying, James stated. And I know, we're all coping with it, more or less, but I'm terrified that anyone I hire might die when they wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah, Sarah started. But they also might save people that they wouldn't otherwise. You can't know. All you can do is give them a chance. James pushed himself off his desk and brushed the papers that were stuck to his elbows off. That makes too much sense, he said. Which means I probably need coffee. Oh shit, I should use the wisdom coffee before this. He thwapped a fist into an open palm as he made the connection. We need to remember to use that stuff more often. I 1,000,000% assumed you drank that by the gallon every day. Hush, James told his friend. Let's go find coffee, and also Anesh. He should be part of this. He's down in the refurbished research laboratory, Sarah said, pushing her chair back and moving to hustle after James as he strode out and through the short hall of their commandeered office space. Also, he told me not to tell you that because he doesn't want to interview people and that you should make all the choices yourself. God damn it, James muttered. Why couldn't he have anxieties that don't complement mine? This is... Oh, Karen. He let his complaining lapse and greeted the woman in the sharp-lined blouse who stepped out of her own office to face the duo as they walked. What's up? Don't hire my daughter. The request, which was not framed as a request, came out in blunt words. Karen was their... something. She most likely saw herself as the moral compass of the Order, guiding them to be non-disruptive to the wider world, while still holding to an attitude of harsh personal responsibility. As far as James was concerned, she was a bit of a jerk with all the good points that she made. She did make good points regularly, tied up in a philosophy of a selfish and unfair universe. She reminded him a lot of his mother. He didn't hold it against her, though. Not too much, anyway. Karen had been having a hard time, and the fact that her kid had nearly died, on James's watch too, was something he felt okay letting her be a bit pissed about. That said... Absolutely not, James said, nodding once. Good, Karen replied, her small and serious frown softening just a hair. Now, I have a report for you. She handed him a printout that James stacked on the pile of folders that he was carrying and glanced at. It was a list of addresses. First of all, we have a group chat so you can avoid sending me stuff like this. Stop killing so many trees, and also our printer ink budget. Second of all, what is this? 6 places where someone has done something unreasonably heroic in the last 2 months and made it into the news, Karen told him, prioritizing the top 2, which list an unidentified woman as the person in question. She tapped a scarred finger onto the page, tilting James's own pile of documents. And I did send it to you in our group server, to the recovery channel. Anesh said I should print it out because you respond well to drama. That is harsh but fair, James muttered as his brain caught up with what he'd been handed. Months ago, during the fight where Karen's daughter had nearly been killed, James and Anesh's partner had also been lost. Not dead lost, but literally lost. They had teleported her away to safety and had no clue where she had gone. Testing with the telepads showed that they really didn't seem capable of telefragging anyone, which was good because it meant that Alana was almost certainly alive. Or at least not dead because of that. But she hadn't contacted them, and the Order didn't have a global intelligence network to draw on to find a single lost girl. But they did have internet access and a vested interest in their people. This was what Karen did. Her and her team. They followed threads, navigated information craters, and they looked for the lost. They helped those impacted by the dungeons get back on their feet, helped families and friends reconnect unobtrusively, and put lives back together. Recovery. It was a good moniker for their group. It was also why James was willing to cut her a lot of slack for being kind of a jerk sometimes. He was still staring at the page she'd handed him when he and Sarah stepped into the elevator. Sarah, reading the feeling of quiet despair that was coming off of James, casually draped an arm over his shoulder. She moved easily, the benefits of magical bonus to health having left her heal through a broken neck and bullet wounds perhaps a little easier than she should have. James twitched slightly at the touch, but she didn't take offense to that. He'd always been a little awkward about it, and the distance between the two of them had grown when she and her memory had been taken prisoner. "So," Sarah said, verbally stabbing the gloomy mood, "I noticed that what you said to Karen could, in some ways, mean exactly the thing she didn't want. What's up with that?" "Surprisingly nothing," James cracked a smile. "It turns out not everyone we save is willing to instantly sign up to throw themselves into death and glory." "Go figure." "Also, I think Momo intercepted Liz's application, so Liz is not here today." "This place, I swear." Sarah pretended to roll her eyes as the elevator descended 1,000 miles north. There was a snap in the damp air as the trigger on the taser was pulled. Two prongs flung themselves forward, connected with Alana's raised bare arm, and bounced off. Her skin didn't rupture. Not easily, anyway. The taser would have more luck getting stuck in the sheen of sweat covering her body than actually embedding itself in her flesh. It was December, for fuck's sake. Why was it so hot? Hot to the point that even though she could feel her physical self rejecting the reality of the temperature, she was still moist and uncomfortable. Of course, she was in Florida. Alana was missing a lot of her memories, but she still had a seemingly endless list of complaints about Florida. Gators, drug dealers, swamps, humidity in swamps, retirees. She had a brief memory of watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon with one of her sisters where the rabbit had sawed through the border of Florida and let the whole thing drift out to sea. It warmed her heart. Also, she realized with a start, she had a sister. Had a sister. At least one. Did she still? The thought was interrupted as someone grabbed her arm and tried to twist her shoulder out of its socket. Oh, right. Someone was trying to kill her. Alana let her arm move as if she were being effectively forced out of position, and as soon as her main assailant stepped behind her to let his buddy approach from the front with a gun drawn, Alana jerked a leg out in a sharp kick and crushed the guy's hand. The gun didn't drop, but he did start screaming something at her, a command to give up that she ignored as she caught him by the wrist and with her free hand and hauled with all the power her inhuman muscles could bring to bear. The two men slammed into each other, neither expecting a girl in her late 20s to be able to fling them around like toys, no matter how physically strong she actually looked. One of them stayed down as their heads slammed together with a crack. Something rattled in his skull enough that he was at least temporarily unconscious. The other one tried to get up, reaching for his own gun with a slurred order to Alana to stop fighting. She kicked him in the head, twice, and he either gave up, blacked out, or died. She wasn't sure which, though she hoped it was the middle one. Either way, the superpower she had that let her tell how people were currently feeling read both of the thugs as blank, so they'd either become emotionless blocks in the last 15 seconds, or they were out of the fight. "Come on," Alana said as she turned toward the sidewalk behind her. Cracked cement and scraggly weeds under a burning sun, the sidewalk ran through a depressingly run-down neighborhood near where Alana was sharing a house with 6 other people who were all struggling to afford rent. This sidewalk in particular was currently decorated with a fallen bicycle and a fallen teenager, and it was the second one Alana extended a hand to. "We should run before they wake up," she told him bluntly. Holy shit! The kid stared at her wide-eyed, scrambling to his feet and ignoring her offered hand. What the fuck are you doing? Alana glanced at the two adult men laid sprawled on the hot pavement. The kid was right. She couldn't leave them there armed. If they woke up too soon, they'd start shooting. So she crouched down and grabbed the one gun from where it had fallen, made sure the safety was on, checked the magazine with a smooth motion that she must have practiced before, and then unclipped the holster of the other man and took his gun too. She'd keep both of them, sliding them into the spacious leg pockets of the cargo shorts she was wearing. Okay, now we should run, she said. The kid looked at her like she was insane, which was fair, but he grabbed his bike and followed her when she started jogging. The trick, Alana figured, would be to get around at least a couple corners, and then, if they weren't being followed or watched, she could just make a straight line in some direction and rent a new place somewhere else. She kept her cash on her person, and the 3 possessions she'd managed to amass were not worth writing home about. Not that writing home was an option for her. She still wasn't sure if her home was even Earth. It had been a weird couple of months. You fucking killed him, the kid panted as he kept pace with her, now pedaling his beat-up mountain bike in the street while Alana took them down the winding side roads of suburban Florida decay. Fucking psycho. You're still following me, though. Alana wasn't even close to out of breath. And they were going to kill you. The statement did not ask for argument. It had the conviction of true belief behind it. Because it was true. She knew it in her bones, like she knew how to breathe or how to walk. She had glanced into their eyes and seen a hatred like no other. A casual desire to hurt, break, and kill. No matter the reason they directed it at the young man next to her, Alana had known, in an instant, that as soon as she was out of eyesight, he would have been as good as dead. She didn't know how her power worked, and it was one of many small things, but it was a critical one. Alana didn't have to spend more than a second on someone to know not how they felt, but also somewhat how those feelings were going to manifest as action. And this time, it had been unacceptable. So she'd intervened. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. She had gotten good at moving in a hurry, finding new places that were willing to give her a couch or a small room in exchange for a few $100 and 0 questions. At least this time, she'd come out with the spoils of war, and was now 2 whole guns richer. She could have taken the car, too, but she was willing to bet there was a tracker of some kind in it, and it was pretty fucking conspicuous, too. Cop cars tended to draw attention that way. 6 blocks later, Alana parted ways from the kid when she was confident they didn't have direct pursuit. He'd probably have nightmares for weeks. She'd have nightmares, too, but only the normal ones that she was already dealing with. For some reason, life or death fights seemed comfortably welcoming to her. Alana wasn't used to her life yet. Maybe she never had been, but she had a memory now, snatched from the fray of combat. She had had a sister, and a home, worn carpet, a green couch with cat scratches in it, the cold. It had been cold. It hadn't been here. Somewhere north, maybe. She wrote it in the only other possession that she kept on her, a notepad with figments of dreams and thoughts and remembrances covering its pages. The act of using a notepad also felt familiar, and she had marked that in the first page. Maybe someday it would help her home. For now, though, she needed a place to stay. Alana started jogging toward the town square and the local library. Sometimes the lack of a shutdown here was useful, and the free internet access would help her out. Also, she could wear a mask, and it didn't look like she was hiding from the police, though it did get her weird looks. Just another day. They came into the lair, and reality broke around them. It was easy to forget. No, that wasn't the right way to say it. It was fun to forget. When you'd already had your expectations crushed, when you lived on the edge of normal, when you didn't know what was out there and the shrouded mystery was part of your day-to-day assumptions, it was fun to pretend that your way of life was the only one there was. James had experienced this kind of thing before, actually. When you had a friend group and general social circle that was either progressive or at least ambivalent about it like JP was, you could sort of start to feel like everyone was cool about a lot of things. And then you ran into someone at a coffee shop or a family dinner who was both loud and bigoted in equal measure, and you got this reminder that people sucked sometimes. When members of the Order went outside now, they had to contend with that. They had to remember that most people didn't fight monsters, didn't teleport into burning buildings to save lives, didn't hang around with biomechanical snakes. Only now, the tables had turned. I'm, the young man, pale and freckled, wearing a button-up shirt he was clearly uncomfortable in, and a face mask he didn't mind, carrying a folded paper in a sweating hand, addressed the camera conda that greeted him past the secure door. I'm here for an interview? His voice squeaked a little. Yes, good, on time, the camera conda said, nodding. They hadn't picked a name yet, but it had gotten a coat made, and it felt like heavy leather covering its cables made it much more secure when talking to new humans. Back hallway, left, you will find them, it told the newcomer. Yeah, okay. Thanks. The human scampered. It was the only word the camera conda could think of for it. It shook its head, a gesture it quite liked that it had stolen from the other Order members. The new humans who had been coming in were skittish. It was only funny the first 3 times. And just like that, reality was gone. It had started small. The offer to apply had come to him in an email from a professor at his college. They're looking for smart people, kind people, the professor had said. You should apply, the old man had told him. His granddaughter had asked him to point people that he noticed in their direction, apparently, which was suspicious on its own. But hey, it was 2020. Sometimes companies still reached out for internships, right? That wasn't too bad. Then there'd been the application, and it had gotten a little weirder. He'd put in a lot of job applications, sent a lot of resumes during his time at college. None of them were like this. There was exactly one question on skills, which simply read, "What can you do?" Nothing else. Every other question was creative, ethics, hypotheticals, stuff out of science fiction. What would you do in a first contact situation? What options does humanity have to survive an out-of-context threat? Would you be willing to work with other species? Even that wasn't enough to put him off. It was a company run by nerds. He was a comp sci major, so he'd taken the time and sent off his answers because the questions were interesting, and a comp sci major working at a company run by nerds was kind of the perfect fit. They'd offered an interview. He tried to show up early and found that he couldn't find the building. He literally missed his exit on a highway he'd driven 100 times. He had taken wrong turns, circled blocks, hit every red light, and then parked on the side of the street, trying desperately to check the address in his phone as his email failed to load. He'd realized he only had a minute or 2 to get where he was going, or he'd be late to the first job interview he had had in months. And then the address had loaded, and he had realized with a start that he was literally curbside of the parking lot he needed to be in. Then he'd stepped through obviously reinforced and armored doors, past a highly paranoid security system, and talked to a snake that moved like a living thing but was made out of cords. And suddenly a lot of weird things didn't seem like one-off strangeness anymore, but part of a daily life reality that actually existed. There were other life forms. There were strange bubbles in reality. There were impossible technologies. And now he had to sit at a table with 3 other people, while a guy wearing a t-shirt bearing a picture of a goose holding a knife asked them casual questions while they waited for the last member of this group interview, and while several of the snakes, camera condas someone called them, a couple of tables over, spoke to a guy who had an orange wraith of energy moving around with his skin. While a drone shaped like a mantis took multiple trips into the kitchen to carry out packages that it took from a mountain of a man and ferried them to the elevator. While someone in body armor came out of a back room, trading places with another person going in, and both of them seemed casual about it. "I have a question," he said, his mouth dry. Oh, yeah, sorry, I figured we'd wait for the last person for questions, but they seem like they're actually just not coming or are super late. So, yes, one question before we get started, James told him, seemingly unaffected by the crushing pressure applied to the normal world of his candidates. The young man composed himself and asked the one thing he couldn't get out of his head. For the 20 minutes that he had been quietly sitting here with his nerves screaming at him, waiting for the interview to begin. "Where's that couch?" he asked, twisting a bit to point down the hall that they'd come through to get to the dining area. "Because it shouldn't be anywhere, and I looked through the kitchen doors and there's no alcove in there." It occurred to him that maybe he either shouldn't have done that or shouldn't have admitted it. The other candidates turned like a single unit, pursed lips and narrowed eyes, staring at the impossible piece of furniture. "Ah!" James grinned at them, and it was the grin of someone who knew far more than they were spelling out. "Now that is actually a very good question." His interviewer made a note in one of the piles of manila folders he had stacked on the side of the table, and pointedly did not answer the question. Then he looked up at the group. "So, welcome to the Order of Endless Rooms. Magic is real. We have some of it. The world has some serious problems, both arcane and otherwise. We are looking for people who are more interested in being adaptable and kind over people who have any particular skills. That said, all of you have the mindset that makes you excellent engineers, which is valuable. We offer a generous salary because we cannot offer health insurance beyond we know a guy." James looked at the 4 assembled candidates, each in turn, and then nodded when none of them argued with him. "All right, I'm going to go grab a drink. You have until I get back to decide amongst yourselves if you're interested in the position, and come up with a list of questions. You can ask 3 things, but only the ones you all agree on." He stood up and walked off, pushing his way through the swinging double doors of the kitchen, and leaving behind 4 people who shared a look of raised eyebrows and slightly open mouths. "Hi, I'm Chavoy," the one woman in the group introduced herself. "That's a test, right?" "Kirk. Has to be," the other candidate introduced himself. "I'm out," the third guy said without preamble. "This is stupid. Probably some dumb practical joke. Also, nobody here is wearing face masks, so they're probably a cult." He stood up and just walked off, pushing past a camera conda in a way that probably didn't scan as rude if he didn't think they were actually people. I'm Mars," the newest arrival said, trying to compose himself and curiously watching the last guy walk away. "Is he serious?" He pointed after their fleeing peer. Kirk shrugged. He was a big guy, so a little shrug had a lot of shoulder to work with. "Maybe he's afraid? I'm kind of nervous about the whole thing, but, you know." He grinned sheepishly at the other 2. "But non-human life!" Chavoy exclaimed, the raven-haired girl leaning in to whisper conspiratorially with the other 2. "This is so cool. Also, we need to figure out what we're asking." "You said it was a test," Mars said. "I don't think it actually is. At least not intentionally. The guy, James, he seems kind of distracted. I think he seriously just only has time for a few questions." "Do you want to ask him if that's true and use up one of our questions?" "No." Mars didn't mean for it to sound condescending, but he feared he didn't get the tone quite right. "That'd be... Oh, I get it. Okay, so what's important?" The 3 of them put their heads together, talking in rapid whispers, quickly building a profile of each other and what they figured would be the most relevant thing to ask about. All of them were technologically minded in some way. They quickly figured that part out. It made sense. Their interviewer had said they had engineer mindsets, but their actual fields were a little eclectic. Computer science, journeyman electrician, and civil engineer, respectively. But their limited time ran out quickly, and as James came back, they were left with what they hoped were the most important things they needed to ask today. "Is this some kind of global conspiracy?" was the first one. James rolled his eyes. "You know, there is actually a section in our operations manual titled, 'We are not a conspiracy.' No, we don't have any interest in keeping things overly secret. That said, obscurity does give us a certain amount of protection, and we don't go posting our exploits on Reddit or anything. I guess the best way to frame it would be as, we will probably answer questions, but you have to ask them first, if that makes sense." James sipped at the juice he'd brought back with him and made a small humming noise. "Oh, and we aren't global. Yet. We exist here and almost nowhere else. We're more underdog than megacorp." "What do you want from us? Or, I guess, why us?" Chavoy voiced the important question. "Because you fit what we want," James said. "You're outspoken. You all want to build better things, improve the world. You've got people who vouch for your character. You're not experts, but that's okay. Neither are we." Yet. He looked around at the other members of the Order moving through the space. If you're asking if you're special, I gotta say no. There is no destiny that we can measure. You are not secretly the chosen ones. But none of us are, so, eh. He looked down at the folder that held their resumes. As for what we specifically want from you, our current focus is on either the design and construction of an arcology or the implementation of security features for a mind-machine interface. That second one is mostly you, he pointed at Mars, because the other guy in the interview left, and we don't have anyone here working on that anymore. The arcology thing is new and more broad. Oh man, I want to ask a whole lot of different questions now, Kirk griped. But you brought up something we all agreed on. So, what's going to happen to the guy that left? What? Uh, we won't hire him? James looked kind of dismissive until his eyes widened and he let out a long, "Oh, I get it. No, he's fine. We aren't going to kill him or wipe his memory or anything. Honestly, we don't have to. We've tried it before. Some people just kind of can't accept magic. Shockingly, it's not the majority of the population, which a lifetime of urban fantasy novels conditioned me to believe. And besides, our building is kind of hard to find. So he'll leave, roll his eyes, and move on with his life, and that's kind of it." No one's going to kill him for knowing too much? Mars found himself asking. Internally, he winced as he went over the 3-question limit, but James didn't seem to notice or care. Who? As far as we know, we're the last ones left in this part of the world. Not that our intelligence network is what I would call operational, and it's not like the government knows anything about all this. Our last FBI guy was actually like our absent friend here. We think government work might collect people like that. You're not going to make us fight each other for this interview, are you? Chavoy accused him again. This is feeling like that kind of thing. Mars blinked. Again. Why did he have such a strong sense of déjà vu all of a sudden? Kirk was looking confused too, maybe because the people in the room around them weren't quite where he remembered them being, but their interviewer just had the same calm look on his face. "No, we already did the interview," James said. "Also, you ask that every time." "It's a reasonable—" Wait, what? The optimistic look on the girl's face faltered. "Every time?" "He said they don't have to mind-wipe people." Mars found his mouth moving without his permission again, but he was committed now, so he pressed on. That kind of implies they can mind-wipe people. He has a different drink than when we started, and there's a stapler on the table now for some reason. There's different people in the room. If we check our phones, it's going to be an hour later than we think, isn't it? He knew the answers to our questions." He looked at James. "Is this the test?" "It's one of them," James said. "Planner, you can go back to what you were doing." He spoke to the open air. "We're good here." He looked back at the 3 of them. "Commendable. You noticed it a lot faster than the group yesterday, and your questions weren't always the same, by the way. Free will is real. Also, you're all welcome here if you want it." "Yes," 3 people said at roughly the same time. "All right," James grinned. "Rufus will show you to the basement. The research division will have introductory packages for you. Welcome to the Order of Endless Rooms." He stood up, snapping his coat around him as he turned to leave. "Be good, recklessly," was the last thing he said as he walked off. A minute later, Kirk leaned over to Mars and whispered, "Do you know who Rufus is?" "I'll bet you $1 it's the stapler," Chavoy said. The 2 boys glanced over at her with incredulous looks. Then the stapler stood up, and she laughed while they scrambled backward. "I'm starting to think Virgil actually made this thing," a member of the research team was complaining to Reed while the young man was trying to solder one final component together. "How?" he asked, his heart not really in the question. "I don't know. Science magic? I don't understand what powers people who level up in computer science get," Mikhail grumbled from where he was sitting at a desk across the room, playing with the file on the disk that Virgil had left them. "It gave a percentage in venom resistance to whoever ran the program. Sort of. They didn't really know where it had come from." I know for a fact you have programming ranks, Reed countered, still mostly focused on his work. Doesn't mean I know what I'm doing. Momo jumped into the conversation. It does! That is literally what yellow orbs do, she exclaimed before Reed cut her off with a click of his tongue and the soldering iron off with the click of a button. Here. Momo reached out and accepted the pair of glasses being handed to her by Reed. They're not perfect, but Nick got the right side of them to line up, so they work. Pair of glasses was perhaps a generous term for the amalgamation of nonsense she had been passed. The base frame were wide-framed sunglasses. Onto that, 6 different lenses had been affixed to the left eye, some of them with tape, some with tiny screws and clamps, one with glue. On the side there was a little swivel clamp that held a pager in place where it could be pulled in front of the eye when needed. The right bar had a pair of headphones coiled around it, which were taped down to a single lens that had been added on that side. There was a pen rubber banded to it. It was a hot mess. Momo kind of hated it. It was also a very useful tool that research had, which was embarrassing. She wanted to be a proper witch, with rituals and cool crystal things and the whole vibe and aesthetic. And these dumbasses were over here being engineers and just cobbling things together that worked and looked like crap. It wasn't fair. The sunglasses specifically protected vision. That was their magical effect as well as their normal one. Your eyes couldn't get hurt while you wore them, which was important because of what the other stuff did. Momo had sort of started to figure out the trick to not breaking blue objects recently, and had used that to add some of their perception enhancers to these. When you wore this, you could see in infrared and microwave, you could tell if the thing you were looking at was a person, or could become a person, and how that person felt about a half-dozen things. You could read any text from 20 meters away. And more importantly, it let them see the cracks. They had needed something like this, a way to more easily detect the craters in reality where an infomorph or an authority had torn out information, had blanked a person. And finally, they had a version that worked well enough. Momo got to use it because she was becoming resistant to brain damage, or she'd already hurt herself in the ways that mattered. Everyone else could use it too, in theory, but if they actually saw a crack, it hurt. Not the eyes, obviously, that was what the sunglasses were there for, but it hurt. Thanks, she said as she held the monstrosity that she was uniquely immune to. Ready for the last test? Yeah, Reed had a grim look on his face. And then we need to get rid of it, before James or Sarah find out and get pissed at us. They'll understand, Momo half-heartedly insisted. Besides, we need to know what we did. She followed Reed through the basement hallways, past the garden that a green orb had added, around a corner that led to a dead end that no one used the rooms in for anything but storage. This was where they had originally piled everything that had spawned with the basement, with both basements. Though an aggressive picking over by research for anything useful, as well as using a lot of the blankets and furniture to stock the bedrooms down here, had sort of cut down on the amount of clutter a bit. Now, the last door on the left led to a room that contained 2 things. The door itself was one of the more locked portals in the entire building, which is to say it had 2 locks for 2 keys. It wasn't magical, it was just something that nobody could accidentally stumble into. Reed and Momo had the only way in, and only if it was both of them. The 2 things in the room were a freezer, with a corpse in it, and a small tessellated hexagonal object with a pile of ID cards around it on the table. There wasn't anything else, just that. Momo slipped the glasses on while Reed shut the door behind them. The corpse was named Marion. It wasn't a person, it wasn't alive, she had been dead for 94 days. She had liked dogs more than people, prioritized gun ownership when she voted, had no current long-term plans, her favorite color was orange, her current wealth was $0. She was affiliated with... Momo found herself looking up at the ceiling while Reed yelled something in panic. I'm okay, she lied, sitting up. Ow. What happened? You started transcribing notes and then you just collapsed, Reed told her. The kid. Fuck, they were the same age. Why did she keep thinking of him as a kid? Did he do the same thing? That wasn't important right now. What notes? Momo asked. Reed handed her a piece of receipt paper, the kind that manifested when you printed stuff off through the pager. Affiliated. Status quo. Okay, we knew that, but it's weird that we can remember they exist when the rest of the universe can't, Momo muttered. Okay, what's else? Some stuff about her driver's license, killed by... secret. She looked at it in annoyance. Reed echoed her thoughts. It's kind of irritating we put this much effort and headache into this stupid thing just to be told it's a secret, he said. We we know that. We know. That's the problem. We don't know what we did. Yeah. Momo lowered herself back to the concrete floor. Well, fuck it. Help me up. I need water, maybe medical attention. She held up a hand and waited listlessly for Reed to stand up and pull her with him. I think we should get rid of the corpse, he told her. We're not going to learn anything more out of this, and it really isn't a good idea to hang on to bodies like this. Cameronconda religion accepting, Reed added with a tip of his head at the end. Okay. Momo's head hurt too much to argue. It was a throbbing pain that swelled behind the bridge of her nose. She felt like if she tried to laugh too hard, her skull would split in half. I'll talk to Pendragon. We can take a trip to the coast and dump Marion here in the ocean. Reed looked at her as he locked his side of the door once they were out in the hallway. Momo wasn't paying attention to anything, just staring down the concrete tunnel with an idle look on her face. Do you ever worry that we might be exactly the kind of problem status quo was trying to fight? Yeah, Momo sighed. But fuck them. None of this had to happen. James offered them an out. As far as we know. I try to imagine James playing us like that, but I'm not seeing it. Or maybe that means he's really good at lying. Momo trailed off. Reed ran a hand through his hair, curls bobbing in the stiff air of the basement. I just feel a little awkward dumping corpses in the ocean, he admitted. It seems like a bad guy thing to do. Well, what are we supposed to do? Go to a funeral home and be all, hey, I found this body at them? Momo groaned as she tried to huff out a laugh and instead saw painful stars in her vision. Alright, enough of this. Painkillers now, ethics later. If James sends us more new hires today, I'm going to yell at him. Or send you to do it for me. Yeah, good luck with that, Reed said, offering her an arm as she helped Momo down the hall. I don't think I'm the right person for this. The words came from a middle-aged woman sitting uncomfortably across the desk from James. They were in his actual office for this interview, because he needed more than anything to gauge her reaction to setting changes, and nothing really said setting change like going up an elevator from a single-story building to find yourself in a skyscraper. The woman, Nancy, was someone who is best described as showing signs of a life lived. She had rough hands with a couple of fingers that were a little misshapen from where they'd been broken and reset. Her voice was steady, she smiled easily, but there were a couple of lines on her face that were scars mixed in among the forming wrinkles. She wore her hair short, her clothing with lots of pockets. She'd been staring out the window at the skyline and highways before James had come out of his office to greet her. Why not? James asked. Internally, he wondered why it was that half his interviews over the last 3 days had been people trying to convince him not to hire them. He had eventually brought all of those people on board. Because I'm not this. Nancy spread her arms to indicate the office as a whole. I think you think I'm something I'm not. What's that? James prompted, trying to see if he could get a direct answer. Powerful? The woman questioningly replied. Magical, maybe? I don't know what you want from me. She sounded almost scared, and in that moment James realized he'd made a mistake in pushing someone a little too far beyond the boundaries of their reality. He had forgotten something himself, that humans sucked sometimes, that not everyone would take him at face value or assume that he wasn't being malicious. Okay, first off, James calmly raised a finger, we aren't looking for soldiers, which is good because I have seen your resume. I won't fight anything for you. The woman seemed suddenly defiant. Again, good, James told her. Look, we're trying to recruit people who have some specific skills, and you fit the bill. This whole thing is mostly to show you that what we're doing is weird, but I promise we're not trying to take over the world or form an evil cult or trick you or anything. I've been a preschool teacher, the woman, Nancy, protested. What possible skills could I have that you need? Unless, do you have children of wizards you need raised? I don't know how I feel about that. That is a great line of thought. Good adaptability. James made a check mark in his folder. Also no. But also yes, kind of? Okay, here's the deal. He took a breath. Trusting people like this was a risk. There was a pretty low ceiling to how much Planner and Pathfinder could manipulate memories, and there was a very real chance that anyone who didn't like what they were doing could bring down a police investigation, or a plain old angry mob. There are places in the world that aren't normal, James explained, where the space doesn't fit where it's supposed to be, where there are dangers and treasures to be explored, and those spaces are alive. He made eye contact to make sure the woman was following along. You've seen the camera condos on the way in. They're from a place like that, but they're still people, okay? Of course, she answered quickly. It had been strange, being greeted by a snake thing with a security camera for a face, but they'd been very polite to her. Good manners were very important. Great. So we have knowledge of a number of those places. Relevant spaces, sometimes they get called. Dungeons, we also call them. Access to a few of them as well. But one of them is new. James was trying to figure out how to explain dungeons to someone that didn't have that particular context for them. Nancy caught to an important word. It's new, and you control it? That's why I'm here? We don't control it, no. We've been inside it. We spend time there. We're trying to... I mean, the easiest way to frame it is just to say that we're trying to raise it to be a good person. But none of us are actually parents or teachers, so we're kind of lost here. No one knows what we should be doing or even how to gain a foothold to learn what we need to learn. So You actually meant to put out a job offer for a teacher. She made the connection. James nodded, idly moving a pencil around his desk. Specifically someone with experience with young children, because as far as we know, that's what Ascent is. Ascent? The place. It's an attic. It likes sunsets. It hasn't tried to kill us. It's a kid. James found he suddenly didn't have the right words for this. I should have brought Sarah in for this interview, he mumbled to himself. You really think I can do something about it? Nancy was suspicious. Like what? Raise it to do what you want? You said they make rewards. Do you want to exploit it? Honestly, I'm not sure, James admitted. There's a part of my brain that would like to say, yep, and start raking in the superpowers, but this is the first one of these places that's acted like a person and not just like a death trap. And we have a policy for dealing with people here at the Order. Nancy narrowed her eyes and crossed her arms in front of her chest. What's that? Her voice was still a little hard, but there was curiosity in there, more than before. Be kind to them, James said, and hold off on the shooting until we absolutely have to. I'll take the job, Nancy decided suddenly, after a little thought. Would you like to do the interview process first? James asked with a laughing smile. The part where I ask you questions, not the other way around. Nancy flushed bright red, the first actual uncertain reaction James had seen from her, aside from her initial trepidation. Oh, she said. Well, get on with it. He'd probably hire her anyway, because that was very funny. Between her and the young man with years of experience as a babysitter, they'd be a good start for a caretaker team. But still, the process was important. James tapped his pencil on the open folder and started asking questions. Miles went in the front door, shadowing a group of high school kids that were far younger than him. He figured he was close enough to their age, in appearance at least, that maybe no one would notice he was out of place. The camera condo was weird to see up close, but he'd scoped enough of them moving around the parking lot that it wasn't shocking, so he didn't react. Nobody else seemed to be reacting. Also, the building itself had been difficult to see directly, but whatever it did that seemed weaker around the asphalt and concrete of the parking lot, and he'd known it was there already. It wasn't right. It wasn't normal. It was something that shouldn't exist, or maybe it was just something that had always existed and the normal world politely ignored. Either way, once he'd found it, it was impossible for him not to pay attention. Following the clues to this place had been the work of about a month. Ever since he'd accidentally stumbled across the first one, it had been something that shouldn't have existed, and people just walked by it. But he had to know. So he deciphered the hint and the next one that led to, and then, content with the fact that he was just playing a really cool ARG, he'd called the phone number that had been buried in an ammo can in the parking lot of a Safeway. And then he'd been told about this place. Not that it was, or what they did, or anything else, only that it did exist somewhere. And that was all Miles needed to know that he had to know what was inside. Now he was sitting around a table with a bunch of kids who were here for some kind of wizard internship, taking in the nature of this building with a frantic grin. "All right, so," James was saying to them, "the four of you—" He blinked and looked around the table. "Hang on." He flipped through the resumes in front of him, complete with the pictures of the assorted students who were now shuffling uneasily in their seats. "You're not one of mine," he said, pointing at Miles. Well, the game was up. It had been fun to get inside and see the place, and he wished he could have gone deeper, but now it was time to flip the chair back, orient toward the exit, and run before he got caught. He should have had more of a plan going in, besides just knowing the general layout of where the exits were. But he'd just gotten so curious, and acting recklessly had always been one of Miles's strong suits. Miles turned, started to run, and smacked directly into the wall of a human wearing a chef's apron that had apparently teleported into his path. "Nah," said a second man, standing just off to the side and rubbing at the hook of a nose he had. "He's one of mine." James sighed. "JP, you know you can just invite people to interviews, right? Figuring out where we are and getting in is the interview, you cretin," JP shot back. "Come on." He tapped the back of his hand on Miles' shoulder. "Step into my office. You'll like my offer way more than the internship one." He leaned in and whispered theatrically, "We are spies." "No," Nate said as they turned and led the new kid away. "Don't bullshit him. We're... spies. Fuck off." James watched the two of them walk off, seemingly assuming that the infiltrator would just follow them of his own accord, and he was mildly annoyed when that proved to be correct. "I'm going to have words with him later," he muttered before looking back to the confused and worried group of actual kids in front of him. "All right, so, who wants to explain their incredibly hazardous desire to be here first?"